It's welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today. We've got a great speaker. I'll give you a little background before I kick it over to him. So I met Carter Hostelly through Dennis. All roads lead to Dennis here at the meetup years and years and years ago. And by way of introduction, on his LinkedIn page, Carter makes social media work for B2B marketers. He's the CEO and Grand Poobah there at Leadtail. If you read his Leadtail bio, it says Carter's a recovering venture-backed CEO and CFO who discovered that marketers were having all the fun. Asked to hear one of his rants, and we've heard some rants on the meetup before. I don't know if we're going to get a rant today, but his top 5 strengths, you'll love this, Carter: strategic, learner, analytic, and then a series of question marks. So without further ado, today, talking to us about how to rethink our B2B marketing in 2023, Carter Hostelly.
Thank you so much, Rich. And I sort of crafted this deck knowing that many folks are content marketers, but I think some of the insights we pull can be more broadly around B2B marketing as a whole. And really the first question to get our heads around is, what is the holy grail of B2B marketing? And any grizzled B2B marketing veteran will tell you it's getting into the magic quadrant for Gartner, into the leaders bucket. And that means that everyone is going to be copying your best practices for years to come, because it's all about the Gartner Magic Quadrant and the best practices that the outline that the leaders are doing. So all of us, will figure that out and follow the leader. But the truth is, you really can't win doing today's best practices. And I know I work with, and my agency works with, a number of venture-backed startup companies. And for any of you that are either helping clients or working, with companies that are competing against some giant enterprise, the truth is you don't have the brand awareness. As the marketer, you don't have the media budgets that they do. You don't have the content teams. Bottom line, you don't have the resources. Plus, everyone else is looking at the same Gartner Magic Quadrant and trying to follow those same leaders. So the key thing to really understand is you can't win doing today's best practices. And I actually call today's best practices sort of the dusty best practices that by the time all of them know them, they've been out there for 5, 6, 7, 8 years now. So that's the first thing to understand, is you've got to come at it a different way, because best practices are not going to get you where you want to be. And so that begs the question, which is, well, what should you do? Now, in some ways, this answer is obvious, and in some ways, it tends to be pretty opaque, hence the magic 8-ball. You should do what will be best practices in the future, because if you can get your head around what those are, well, chances are you can start to do them today in a way that puts you ahead of and on the right track relative to everyone else. Now, it's been a few years, but I had this conversation with a senior marketer, a CMO, probably, gosh, I want to say 5, 6 years ago now. And she was actually calling me up. She was writing a byline and wanted to, get my take on a couple things. And I sort of said, after our conversation, I said to her, hey, how are you doing? How are things going with you? And she said, the truth is, I'm really feeling burnt out. As a senior B2B marketer in this environment, I feel like I can't stay on top of, the MarTech stack and everything that's happening with digital and what's happening with all the algorithms. And I sort of feel like I've lost my soul a little bit. And by the way, this is not a one-off conversation. I hear this a lot from very senior marketers, sort of turning the crank for a while. And I said to her, the part of the problem here is you're focused on the wrong algorithm. And she said to me, what do you mean? I said, you're focused on the technology algorithm. The thing you've forgotten about is the human algorithm. And you're doing things as a marketer and as a database marketer, like sending out all these emails or robocalls or all this other stuff, even though you as a human, don't like this yourself, because you're a C-suite decision maker and you're getting hit with all this stuff. And it really set me on the path of understanding that there are two algorithms that we are competing for and in understanding and working within as marketers. One is the human algorithm, and one is the technology algorithm. So if we talk a little bit about the human algorithm, this is where, when we think about our buyers want it to be about them, right? Buyers want to work with vendors they like and feel a human connection with. Buyers want help from subject matter experts so they can make the right purchasing decisions. Buyers want to engage on social media as part of a community. But how are we as marketers, at sort of the, bowing down to the technology algorithms? How are we coming at it? Well, we want it to be about our brand's product and service. We want to figure out how to further optimize the marketing stack and make sure we're using all the right tools and just pound sand trying to eke out a little extra out of them. We're supporting sales teams that are focused on sending out ever more emails. And then that's informed by algorithms around buyer intent and AI insights. And heck, we just want to grow social media followers because we think about social like a glorified email list we can keep hammering again and again and again. And this really creates, a disconnect. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying, oh, hang on, my screen has frozen. There we go. I'm not saying that as marketers, we shouldn't take into account the algorithm. I as a social media marketer, I have a lot of conversations with folks these days about gaming the LinkedIn algorithm. And I say, well, you got to tag people in posts. You got to use hashtags. It's all about generating engagement quickly, which takes me down a sidebar talking about employee advocacy. You got to think about dwell time. So, let's create these long mini blog posts. Let's do video, right? You got to get people to comment. So when you're doing polls, make sure option number 4 is always other and ask them to comment below. My pet peeve is people like now to do posts without links because the platforms don't want to send you off platform, but it just creates a terrible user experience. But so what? I'm trying to make the algorithm work. And then you got to be pretty, regular about it. And then of course, there's the downside. You tag too much, you do these sort of things. So it's very important to, yes, understand the algorithm. And now, Dennis, I know, or I'm sure you'll have a chat GPT algorithm meetup at some point to talk about all the stuff that's happening with this new algorithm and what it means for us. All of this is wonderful and great. But we as marketers, we forget that our buyers, want to work with brands that they like and feel a human connection with. And I sort of snark. I used to snark on calls that, hey, this was really a millennials thing, all touchy-feely, but having all of us gone through the pandemic, the truth is we all feel this way now. We all want to work with brands that we like and feel a human connection with, right? And this is really a struggle for marketers when they truthfully are pretty obsessed around all the different type of algorithms that make them do things that and often are very counter to what buyers care about and counter to the human aspects of things. And the secret or the answer around this is just humanize our marketing efforts. I show this, we were the social agency for Bill.com for years and years and years. And one of the things we really pushed with them was to, push all the wonderful baby and brand swag stuff. And it's funny because we'll have a client that does a post, baby and brand swag or some equivalent. And during the same month, they'll have done a big funding round, 200 million or whatever. And much of the chagrin of the PR team, the babies and brand swag social posts always drive way more engagement than the funding round, right? And that's no surprise to me. And it's probably no surprise to any of you that have clicked on all the fun sort of human-oriented content that's out there. on LinkedIn, and within, video, et cetera, et cetera. And so, what you want to think about in a marketer is just how, whatever we're doing, how do we humanize it more, right? How do we showcase the people behind the brand? How do we celebrate special days like holidays? One of the things I'm telling folks and clients is, hey, Valentine's is coming up. So, show your love to employees, show your love to customers and partners and whatever, and do that as creating content. Super Bowl's coming up, same thing. But humanizing by just acknowledging others, giving shout outs, thanking folks, shining the light on your own subject matter experts. One of the things I'm talking to clients a lot about now is, look, can we stop with the boring speaker image, and can we ask speakers to do a little selfie about why, what they're going to be talking about and how excited they are, and that kind of stuff. So the question for all of you is, as you create marketing content, as you draft blog posts, all of that, just have this question in your mind: how can you do a better job of humanizing your content? Now, if I netted it out, the real insight here, I believe, is yes, the algorithms are important, but being human in your marketing approach is more important. Now, we talk about humanizing. Another key aspect is, that I've learned, is make it about others, right? Or to say it another way, the more you make it about others, the more they will make it about you. The more you make it about you, nobody cares. So I just do some simple examples here. At Leadtail, we now have 3 podcast series. And look, I don't really care about how many streams and how much traffic it generates to the site. I simply look at it as an opportunity to showcase people within the B2B marketing community and make them the stars, right? So whether it's, a podcast, and I show 3 examples of our, or it's, as a number of you that know me, we host dinners in the Bay Area. We're having one tonight. It's the more, we work to make it about others, the more those folks bend over backwards to raise our awareness and say nice things about us and create credibility within the B2B marketing community, right? So really, really important. Now, when you make it about others, a funny thing happens is you create advocacy. And advocacy tends to sometimes sound a little bit like a complicated word, but let me simplify it. Advocacy simply means somebody likes you. And the truth is, the easiest way to get someone to like you is to like them first. And you do that, as I've just talked about, by showcasing them. So when you as content marketers think about your content roadmap, right? I ask you, how much of your brand content in that roadmap is about shining the light on others? Okay, and I mean beyond simply the occasional, customer story. Okay, and I would strongly suggest, again, with the experience I have, in seeing this stuff, is it's not enough, right? And it's not hard, right? Launch a podcast or LinkedIn Live series, just interview those within your buyer community. Encourage guest posts from other subject matter experts for your blog. Invite target contacts to present in a webinar series, attend your VIP events, right? Sometimes folks say to me on social, hey, we can never get our customers to share our stuff. Well, I asked them a simple question back. Well, how much are you sharing your customer news on your feeds? And it's crickets. Of course they're not. So look for opportunities to make it about your customer and share their news on your social feeds. Give them a kudos. Give them a shout out, right? But it's really about creating advocacy. And sometimes what I hear too is advocacy is post-sale. And that's why, we need more customers, or it's hard to get customers to advocate. I back in the day, I was a huge fan of Marketo and HubSpot, and I'd never once ever used their service, but I love their content and it was so helpful. So no surprise to us content marketers on the call, right? And I advocated them all the time, even though I had never once, and to this day, have used their services. So advocacy is not just post-sale, it's pre-sale, right? It's really every conversation you have with someone, every way you can focus on helping them. But in the context of today's discussion, the question is, how can you make it so your brand content roadmap and your marketing is shining the light on others in a way that creates advocacy. And I take it further. I think advocacy is the new brand awareness. You know, I joke that there's a lot of brands I'm aware of because I went to their site and they retarget the crap of me to the point that I will not visit their website again. Yes, I'm aware of their brand. And by the way, if they got their SDRs on top of me too, then I make a mental note that I will never buy from them. So yes, total brand aware. And I share this, I'll share stories with other marketers to go, don't go to their site because they will retarget and the SDRs will be all over you. And so, yes, you know, I'm aware of the brand, but boy, I'm not advocating it at all. So you want to think about advocacy as the new brand awareness, because truly advocacy at scale is word of mouth. And we all learned long ago as marketers that the most powerful force out there is word of mouth marketing. But to me, it's truly advocacy at scale, and advocacy should be what we talk about versus brand awareness. Now, the other interesting aspect of advocacy is it builds community, because advocates spread the word, as I just mentioned, about your brand in a way that's very trusted and credible to your buyers. Advocates also have a vested interest in seeing your brand succeed within the community. And advocates help you identify other community members that can become advocates, right? So they enlarge the party. And advocates help your subject matter experts at your companies, or if you're a subject matter expert, will help you become a valued member of the community. And as you know, in the intros, a few of us referenced Dennis and the great job Dennis has done in bringing us into this community, right? Now, I'm talking about community for a second, but I don't want to take for granted that you know, whether or not folks understand the importance of community. Right. The power of community is it has a shared purpose. It's an entity upon which community members trust and rely on each other for sharing valuable information. And then, of course, what we care about as sellers is and recommendations like vendors they should try, right? Or vendors they should use. And the truth is, communities are the power behind, you know, many of the top B2B brands that we today really, really take for granted, right? Whether they're marketing brands or whether technology brands, or of course, you know, the content marketing meetup itself. Without community, I believe this is what you experience. This is an actual quote from a director of growth from a conversation I had less than 2 weeks ago. This is what that director said to me. She said, they downloaded a white paper, then I emailed them 7 times over the last 30 days, no response. There's got to be a better way. And I suspect a lot of sales teams are feeling this way. I sure see how many emails I get from vendors. And in this type of market, it's not what you want to, you know, be trying to use these sort of tactics. You know, you sort of hoped you had a community to tap into to begin with, but this is really the power of community. And even when I talk to folks about social media, which is my particular domain, it's amazing to me how folks are still very focused on follower count. Okay, and that's just an optics thing. Do we have more followers than our competitors do, and all of this? And I have to explain to them that if none of these followers have engaged with one of your LinkedIn posts, for example, in the last, you know, 30 to 60 days, it's as if they're not following you, they're not going to see your stuff. So we got to switch from thinking audience and followers to community, because community is truly an asset, and it's the power that sits behind some of those brands that we've already talked about. And it's not hard to signal community. Share the content of others. Thanks, folks, for sharing the brand content. Respond to inbound comments and questions. You know, start to ask questions and poll. Show conversation is two-way, right? And by the way, it's going to drive your social performance. You're going to see a lot more engagement. This is another thing that drives me batty, and usually this is when I'm talking to the PR teams, and I'll sort of be upfront here and tell you that nobody is biting at this. But all the PR teams out there are really trying to push the executives to do thought leadership. You know, they're all tasking us as content marketers to write more thought leadership. And I always try to say, look, you know, it's like all these executives in particular are trying to be the smartest person in the room. But on the other hand, we all know what it's like to be around someone that's trying to be the smartest person in the room, right? And instead, we want to think about, hey, how can someone be positioned as a valued member of the community? Now, even that question itself leads to lots of interesting insights, like who is our community and what do they value and how can I add value to them, right? So it starts to move us in the right direction when we're thinking about, content. Because the truth is, when we're obsessed about the customer, let me say it another way, when we're obsessed about the prospect, we're really only looking through the lens of, how do I get them to buy? Versus, what is the larger thematics of what are they trying to achieve and what do they support and what are their affinities, right? And how can we be a valued member to them? So, as you switch and start to think about, community, as I said, there's some basic questions. Who do you want in your community? Now, we're going to touch on that again in a moment or two. But how does your content strategy help build community? How does your content marketing add value to the community, right? These are some of the questions we need to start to think more about, in my opinion. Because when you boil it all down, I really believe, and some of this belief comes from, I will tell you I'm biased, we've had a number of clients that, are in the open source space and just seen the power of, having the developer relations, for example, focused on supporting the community, how that turns into very, very powerful marketing and brand awareness and advocacy, which is everything we're talking about today. So I just bear hug it and say the future of B2B marketing is community, because I am literally sick of how many lead gen calls I get, how many SDR calls. We're all probably at the point where none of us answer the phone if we don't recognize the number showing. And yet that's so counter to when someone from the community reaches out and needs help. It's the first email I follow up with. I make the time, I do everything I can, like Dennis inviting me and Rich inviting me to speak today. So given that we sort of are starting to understand, hey, best practices, I just can't do what those are. And I've got to humanize marketing and I've got to shift to think about advocacy and how advocacy at scale turns into word of mouth and builds community. Well, we still have the very tactical, fundamental thinking of, okay, well, how do we reach and engage these community members, right? I'm a big believer in account-based marketing. I believe it really helps you align on who exactly you want to be, have in your community. It doesn't mean that I'm against inbound, but most of the clients we deal with, they're not selling something for $50 a month. And they're doing a lot of this account-based marketing stuff. And also I'm a big believer that social media research helps you discover where this community that you're targeting already exists. It's kind of funny to me. I have the conversation often when the concept of community comes up, and every client comes at it the same way. How do we build our own community? How do we build a community? And I'm like, well, the community most likely already exists somewhere. So maybe the question is, where first is the community now happening? And then secondly, how do we add value to the community so the community invites us in versus thinking we're going to just launch a Slack channel, or a LinkedIn group or something else, and all of a sudden, just add water to this community, right? So you kind of have to think about it the right way. The other thing that ties into this is I really believe that the notion of the content funnel is very outdated, top, mid, bottom. I get it, I really understand it really well. But I think we want to switch it up to be more from the, the community or the buyer's perspective, right? How do they discover brands and vendors? How do they become interested in them over time and then finally have intent around that? But before we tackle that, we're still very bound by this very basic thing, why does content marketing still mean mostly text? I mean, it just drives me nuts. And I talk to a zillion content marketers and, it's just mostly text still. And the reason I bring it up in the context of discovery, interest, intent is because video is actually the best content for a brand to use to get discovered, since we're all reading and seeing our content and watching our content on phones. right? So it's really about video, and also all of the platforms, if I go back to the fact that yes to algorithms, they're all leaning into video because they're all super envious of the success TikTok is having. And TikTok is further training us about the power of video and looking for video, et cetera, right? And, you know, when I talk to early stage companies, maybe there's just a marketer or two at this company, I'm going like, just, you know what, just leapfrog text and go right to video. Okay, you can still pull out the transcript, summarize it as a blog post, have it for SEO. So look, you get the tech stuff, but go right to video. But I also know for many of us that have been content marketers for a while, flipping a switch to video is non-trivial, and that it's really about empowering users to engage with our content however they want. So if they want text, great. If they want audio, great. If they want video, great. So if you can't leapfrog right to video first mindset, then at least shift from thinking text only to text plus mindset. So text plus, let me think about some video. Let me think about some audio. Let me think about some other interactive ways of doing things versus just scribbling out, you know, the next content piece, written text. Okay. It is also why, you know, I sort of have an opinion that, you know, video podcasts are really the new blog posts. And this is a direction we want to be thinking about. The other sort of thing I would say, besides the fact that, you know, the funnel's outdated and we should be thinking discovery, interest, and intent, and that we have to lean to text plus or video first, is that, you know, the vast amount of our effort as content marketers or even as marketers is still on the production side of things. Okay, and we need the production. We need to understand our target audience. We need to identify themes and topics to write about. We need to create the content, i.e. write the text. We need to figure out the graphics to go with it, and we need to hit the publish button. But increasingly, we've got to be thinking about, you know, the real puzzle, which is how do we get content distributed effectively and get it syndicated, right? And I always define these as two different things. So to me, content distribution means essentially leveraging our own website, our own email database, and our own social media channels. And I really believe that even there's not enough thought put into how best to distribute the content. And then there's content syndication that I really view as leveraging somebody else's audience or platform. So how do we post in a way that gets other people to amplify our social posts? How do we get our employees to share? Because believe it or not, we don't own their social profiles. How do we get influencers to share? How do we get more intermediate pickup? And how do we leverage social advertising? I really believe, you know, the puzzle is more about the being smart about content distribution and content syndication. That doesn't mean the production is not important, but we shouldn't be spending 95% of our thinking around production and barely 5% on distribution and syndication. And I know why we tend to do that, because we have an over-reliance, or as I put, hope that somehow SEO will do the heavy lifting for us. So we create great content, lots of keywords, index, we don't have to worry about this content distribution syndication stuff. Okay. And I would argue that that's wrong, right? And I would argue, and this is Rand Fishkin quote, you know, I would argue that it's not only your big competitors, again, who have more content, more brand awareness, more whatever, you know, page rank, but you're also competing against Google, right? And it's really hard to win this battle in any meaningful way to really feed the sales teams. So from that, I came to believe that really social advertising is the new SEO. Okay, when you think about SEO, it's hard to get on page one. You never get enough leads, unpredictable lead flow. Many inbound leads are not high quality. Okay, it creates this hamster wheel of more and more content. Okay, we can't directly leverage for demand gen. For social ads, we can control a lot of these variables. We can test, we can focus on anchor pieces. And I'm not saying SEO doesn't matter. I'm just saying, hey, can we shift some of the thought and energy from SEO over to how to better leverage distribution and syndication, and in this specific example, social ads. And when you start to put it all together, and I'll send the deck over, maybe the slide will be helpful, but you know, you start to go, okay, let me put these pieces together. Okay, let me think about the stages: discovery, interest, and intent. And let me think about what would be the best type of content at each stage on the different social platforms. And then let me look at it in the context also of social advertising, right? That the audiences I'm going to create, how I use retargeting, and how I should judge whether or not it's performing well, and how we'll generate leads. So you can start to put these different concepts together in a way that leads to different strategies and best practices than arguably what I see being done today. And I'm going to just end with my view of the world. And this is just how I look at things. I really think that we need to move from this funnel view to how many MQLs to, the debate with the sales team about how do we get more leads? We need more leads, to really having something pick up the concepts we talked about today. Okay, if I know ABM, the strategic accounts, the top target accounts, and I know who I want to be in the community, and I focus my efforts around the content roadmap and social, et cetera, on driving advocacy within this community, it'll turn into deal flow. Okay, it will turn into deal flow. And I found over the last handful of years that this has worked really, really well for what my agency Leadtail does. We're a 7-figure agency, and we've never had, nor will we ever have, a salesperson. And we focus on building community and advocacy. And I tell you, every week leads come in. And I don't think this is just an agency thing. I think this can be very, very scalable. Plus, it prompts the right questions and goals. So if my questions are around, well, who should be in the community and how do we add value? Those are great questions for marketers to be tackling. And if my goal is to increase the size of the community and increase advocacy in the community, boy, that sure feels like it's a much more fulfilling to be the marketer trying to do that versus the marketer feeling really frustrated because they can't generate enough leads for the sales team, and all they're doing is trying to figure out MarTech stacks and all this other crap that burns them out. Because it feels good to be thinking about how do I grow the community, and it feels good to be thinking about how do I make it about others, make it human, and drive advocacy. And I have seen again and again and again, every year I see it, it drives in wonderful deal flow with a much shorter sales cycle too, because you've been recommended in. It just makes it a lot easier. Now, with that, I will end with this one last sort of insight. Whether you agree with me on any of this or not, the fundamental thing is you're going to become a better marketer by focusing on where things are going, figuring out for yourself, then how you can take advantage of that and build it into your own best practices today that reflect that. And you're going to be much more successful doing that versus trying to regurgitate the same best practices everyone else is doing. I will now open it up for any questions, comments, folks that want to counter my opinions. I welcome it all.
Well, very good, Carter. Thank you so much. There's been a lively chat going, and I've asked for some questions there. I also queued up one of my own as kind of a give people a chance. If you don't want to chat, you can also raise your hand on Zoom. Dennis and I are call on you. My question is actually a question that was the first one in the chat, and this is around measurement. Now, I'm increasingly focused in my role to measure the performance of the content we publish. Not just is it achieving our business objectives, but more importantly, is it meeting the informational needs of the audience? Like, are we serving them something they value? Question in the chat is from Priyanka. What are some KPIs, some key performance indicators, to keep in mind while advocating for another person or brand?
Well, I think basically you want to shift from, and this will seem a little counterintuitive because we were talking about community a moment ago, which feels like it's a big group, is you want to have KPIs that are starting to shift from the notion of how many to who. Okay, so all of the KPIs you now use, time on site, how many visits to the page, how many leads generate, all that's great. But, when you start to, and some of this is going to tie in ABM, when you start to say, hey, here are specifically the people I want to reach and engage. And did I do that or not? Or how many did I reach and engage? Then the argument in getting more people is going to be easy. And I see this on the social side. Like, I'll talk about engagements and all of that, and the CMO or the CEO will sort of roll their eyes. But then I show them some of the people in particular that followed the page, or that liked it, or that whatever, and they go, oh, do our salespeople know this person just started following the page? Or, oh, that's exactly the type of folks we want sharing, engaging with. It's a whole different conversation.
So it's less quantity, more quality.
It's about the who, right?
Right,
And it's
who.
counterintuitive because, one of my themes last year is what's old is new again.
Yeah.
And I believe that social, we have to stop thinking about one-to-many and increasingly start thinking about one-to-one and one-to-few.
Okay. I'm gonna go
Okay,
on
so
some
it
more.
really is about the who.
Okay, thanks, Carter. I've got a couple more questions here going in sequence from the chat. This is from Melissa. What do you think about dark social? There are recommendations happening in online communities that don't have proper tracking, right? Tying into metrics here, such as Facebook, Slack, Discord, Reddit groups. I know I've tried some of the business products recommended by other business owners in these communities. So dark social, Carter, how's that play?
Well, I think a couple of things. So obviously, dark social is a measurement and arguably an attribution problem. But, and it'll always be there. And part of this is because, Google doesn't want to show you anymore, right? Because back in the day, they used to. I really flip it around and say, if you're focusing I would take it two ways. So number one, you can see, especially on social, who likes your stuff, who retweets your stuff, who is looking at your profile, et cetera. So there's plenty you can see from which you can then build an argument around to say others are doing this. The other thing is, and I'm really amazed, I was talking on a client call earlier today, and this is a pretty sophisticated RevOps company, and they're not even doing UTM tracking. They're not even doing any of the back end stuff. And I often talk to clients where the salespeople aren't even asking, hey, how'd you hear about us when you jumped in, when someone signed up via the book a demo or contact us? And by the way, that's the first question I always ask. How did you hear about Leadtail?
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to get information around the ring so you can do a hypothesis. I don't think we will solve. Now someone else on the call may have a different opinion. I think dark social will always be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really about what are the indicators you see from how folks are engaging all the way through to, making sure the salespeople are asking the question and logging it in Salesforce. How did someone hear about us?
Yeah. Thanks, Carter. Two comments and then more questions. One, it's what we try to do on the meetup. How'd you hear about the meetup? And it's
Exactly.
usually Dennis.
That's exactly right.
Two, as a fanboy of Rand's, he's no longer with Moz, but I think some of you are familiar with Spark Toro. If you're not, look in the chat link. Great audience research getting at the who. Who are you trying to reach? Where are they? How might you reach them in unconventional ways? And trying to get them on the meetup as well. Amanda's super smart. Couple more questions here from Priyanka. Question, what are some boundaries you could set as an advocate for a person brand? Priyanka, I might need a little more color on that. Boundaries, maybe Carter, you have an answer, but I'm not certain. What did you mean, Priyanka, by boundaries?
Hi, Rich. Thank you for taking my question, and thank you for Carter for doing this presentation. By boundary, I meant basically you don't want to come across. I mean, you want to help the brand or the person, but you also don't want to come across as being pushy or being so kind of balanced. I think kind of like trying to be helpful to the brand but not coming across as too pushy or spammy or
So I'm going to make two comments on this. So number one, it has to be authentic. Okay, because we all, if someone is trying to upsell us and they're telling us because it's trying to help, they care about us and want to help us, it's just so it's painfully obvious they're not being authentic. So you got to be authentic. And number two, what makes it easier to be authentic, I'm a former startup VP of sales. I deal with salespeople a lot. It always drives me nuts. The salespeople are always trying to close the person on the phone versus turn the person on the phone into an advocate upon which that person unlocks the rest of their network. Right. And if you focus on helping someone and turning them into an advocate, then you're going to be authentic, and then you're not going to push because, you may be the first person to say, you know what, we're not the right solution for you. You should go check these folks out. Okay. So that's really, that's really the key. And the mindset as a salesperson, or even as a marketer, is to realize if I turn the person I'm talking to on the phone into an advocate, I may get their sale, and I'm going to own the mind share of whenever anyone in their network asks them what vendor I should talk to, they're going to point in my way.
Yeah.
Versus how do I close this person on the phone
Right.
because that's going to take me down the path of being pushy, even if I come at it authentically and try to help.
Right. Well, Carter, it occurs to me that you illustrated your answer with the GIF from Wednesday where her roommate's like, oh, not a hugger. I get it. Right. So it's not crossing that boundary. Couple more questions. We've got about 12 minutes left and go quickly here. Another from Priyanka. What is the best channel to build a community?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, and this is where the social listening comes in, it's really a function of where is the community currently, because the community is somewhere. Now, whether they're in a Facebook group, LinkedIn group, whether it's a meetup like this, right? Whether they're on Reddit, okay, that's the thing you want to discover.
Okay.
Okay, it's not just saying LinkedIn because they're buyers. I mean, that's not correct.
Right, right. Okay, thank you. I'm moving quickly here. Sean Murphy, question. Was not clear on whether you, sorry, just hiccup there. You do not put links in LinkedIn posts, pleasing the algorithm, or put links in, making them more useful for humans. A little bit about that game, Carter. You mentioned LinkedIn, whether to link or not.
Yeah. So in a perfect world, if we think about the LinkedIn algorithm, and again, I could be saying Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, the LinkedIn algorithm, and I had the human algorithm, and I sort of overlap them into a Venn diagram. That's where I want to play.
Okay.
Now, my North Star is customer experience, user experience. So when I'm wrestling between the algorithm versus the human, it means I go with the human. So yes, I understand that LinkedIn will give a post a little extra love if you put a link in a comment, but I also know that that's extremely frustrating for a human if they actually are interested in going to the information. And by the way, LinkedIn will hide the link and don't even put it as the most relevant comment. So you have to, I mean, it just ends up being a very, very bad experience. So when in doubt, I default to human.
Good, smart. And here's a good segue from Floyd Smith. Resonates with me. Mainstream way is basically shouting at people, shouting louder when that doesn't work, right? This is more inviting. How do you get team or upper management support for it? How do I build a business case, Carter, and get buy-in from up the chain?
Well, this is where account-based marketing is really good. Okay, so if your company is doing or investigating account-based marketing, I typically wrap it around account-based marketing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm making it about the who, right? And that's really the way to come at it. And that's why in my math equation, I start with ABM, the strategic accounts. And I've learned this over time that if I'm just talking about community and advocacy, it all seems fluffy, it all seems whatever. And so I've got to anchor it in something that they understand first, right? Is how I've learned to sort of come at this. Now, if they're not doing account-based marketing, typically they still will be using terms like and have strategic accounts. Right. I will say, let's figure out who our strategic accounts are, and let's figure out how to start to build community with the people at those strategic accounts and showcase those people within content. Yeah. And it can be as simple as saying, it'd be great to let's reach out to some of them to see if they'd like to guest on the podcast or, come to our, or whatever. But you're really making it around something that at least the executives have talked about or heard about. It's being pushed, versus trying to just do the fluffy community thing, which I guarantee you will not get any traction in a meaningful way.
Real good. Sequentially, next question is a nice segue. This is from Jennifer Johnson. In introducing community-centric KPIs, how do you balance the conflict with competing-based KPIs? That's kind of schizophrenic behavior across channels. Seems like you need to get the org to buy into human-centric measurements and scrapping the funnel altogether. So what do we do with community-centric KPIs? Well,
what I would say is this, there's always a practicality, and I've had this conversation with CMOs a lot, right? They'll say, well, I love the North Star thing, but I could just dive into community and advocacy. My CEO will never buy off it, right? And I say, set it up as a pilot thing, right? Set it up as a pilot thing. Now, coming back to sort of the broad question around KPIs is have KPIs that are oriented around the who. Okay, so here's 50 target accounts. How many of these target accounts do we engage on social? How many of these target accounts do we engage with our content or our marketing? How many of these target accounts came to the website, right? But it's got to be mirrored with advocacy, meaning you want opportunities to make the content about these people. I always say that, and we used to talk about, pre-pandemic, all about the content tidal wave or the content crush or whatever. And I always used to say, look, there's one thing that if it hits my email, I stop everything I'm doing and look at it. It's a Google alert.
Hmm.
Now it's a LinkedIn alert or a Twitter alert. Somebody mentioned me. I stop everything, go check it out, right? So you want to think about, so there's a practicality that says, you're going to keep the KPIs, the CMO still want MQLs and all this stuff, but you're going to start to insert in KPIs that are very much about the who, and you're going to start to influence the content roadmap where you're going to do Q&A posts, or you're going to do these things that give you a chance to measure the success of something based on, who you were able to engage, and making sure that that's tied back to the accounts that the teams care most about. I always say in talking to folks, I go, look, we're going to use social to really support the sales team around their target accounts. And immediately folks start head nodding at me and go and tell me more.
Yeah. Very good, Carter. Well, I think I've gone through at least all the questions on the chat sequentially. If I've missed you, either chat it now or raise your hand or just come off mute. And we have Carter for a couple more minutes. I'll pass it over to Dennis as well. Dennis, do you have any questions for Carter? Any gotchas or curveballs or loaded questions, perhaps?
Or it's rare, Dennis, that you actually agree with me on something.
That's not true. I mean, we have healthy debates, but well, my question is, since you mentioned it on the slide, ChatGPT, this is a little bit, well, maybe off topic, but maybe it's not if we're talking about 2023 strategy. Just give us your preliminary thoughts on ChatGPT.
Yeah, what I would say is I throw in the algorithm bucket, right? But what I would say is it's always the lowest common denominator, right? That's where fear is, right? Whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's low code, no code, if you're an engineer, right? And so, yes, those sort of technologies will help me summarize a podcast quickly, maybe write some generic social posts, maybe these sort of things. But what it won't replace? It won't replace a really engaging conversation over a video podcast. It won't replace, someone writing a post and having a strong view or opinion around it, which is why, as you get a sense of me or hear me, I have very strong opinions, right? So we shouldn't be afraid of things that are knocking out the lowest common denominator. Instead, we should really build them in, because if that can do something, more effectively and then let's have that do that, because we can use our time and our expertise and our passions and our opinions creating other stuff that ChatGPT will not be able to replace. Any other opinions on that? That's sort of mine.
Well, Floyd noted that previously I disagreed about disagreeing with you. So Floyd, I disagree with you, Floyd.
Exactly.
One of the best rants was back in the in-person DNN days, where Carter, I think it was an Ask Me Anything, and it was a series of rant answers. I loved it. I do want to catch another question from Jennifer. Sat in a CMO call the other day on a similar topic. They actually moved community development and advocacy outside of marketing. Seems like that sets up its own problem. Wondering your thoughts here, Carter, in terms of where does community sit organizationally?
Well, I would say there's a perceived notion of community today that sort of dovetails in with existing users / support, help desk, all of that. Okay, so broadly customer support. Okay, and from that notion, it may very well make sense to move it out of marketing. When I'm talking about community, and really what we're looking at is how do we sell, right? Because we're on the marketing side. Mm-hmm. How do we create brand awareness / advocacy and make it easier for our salespeople and get in there? And that should absolutely be a marketing thing. The problem is, just like I was talking about advocacy, a lot of people think advocacy is post-sale. A lot of people think community is post-use use or post-sale, or it's existing users, But the opportunity is really to plug into the larger story around community, especially if we're looking to drive business, which is those that aren't using our product. And that should really, really be focused by marketing, which is why I always say, if you talk to marketers and they say they're customer centric and all of that, that means they're trying to understand how, the pain of the customer in the context of how to buy the product that's being sold. I really look at it as that, what is it the community supports and how can we best support them in a way that then can create advocacy that can result in sales because they trust us and we're credible. That whole piece for sure should sit with marketing.
Yeah. Well, as we run out of time here, Carter, I want to thank you. I'm going to pass it to you, Dennis, but thank you for such lively engagement, everyone on the call, Carter for the presentation. In the chat, you'll see I did put a couple links if you want to stalk Carter online on Twitter and LinkedIn, etc. And I'll now pass it to you, Dennis, to take us out.
Thanks so much, Rich. Carter, thanks for presenting. For those of you that want to learn more about Carter's company, visit leadtail.com. And so speaking in ChatGPT, it's not published yet, but our very next meetup will be in February. And Rich and Rosemary will do a demo of some use cases for ChatGPT in marketing. So stay tuned. I will publish it this afternoon. So most of you are subscribed to our group, so you'll see the notification. And other than that, stay safe and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.